Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at BTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at an important development that has taken place today with the Indian Supreme Court ruling that the abrogation of Article 370 and 356A is something which is going against the country, and this is not something that is acceptable as per the petitioners. This is something, of course, that is going against the people of Kashmir and has increased their suffering that has been going on for many, many decades now. The Supreme Court of India and the Chief Justice of India has remarked that whatever was the special status was a temporary provision and that this was not something that was meant to be permanent, including that the Constituent Assembly of Kashmir was not meant to be a permanent body. And therefore, the way that this unilateral action has been taken back in 2019, where the special status has been revoked, has now been also legally termed as acceptable by the Indian Supreme Court, claiming that these decisions can be taken by the centre and that Kashmir, the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, was an integral part of India and therefore does not need to remain as a separate constituent body, and has also asked the Election Commission of the country to hold elections on September 30th, 2024. This is, of course, something that is extremely unacceptable and condemnable and has been rejected by Pakistan with reference to what has happened before and also since many decades in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, adding to the misery of the people there, and against the UN Security Council resolutions, something which is still pending before the Security Council as a decision needs to be taken on the special status of Kashmir, which was earlier revoked in 2019. We are, of course, 4 years away from that decision as well, and now we see that the Supreme Court has added more trouble with providing legal input with reference to what has been going on and also asking for elections next year, which means that serious action needs to be taken before that even begins, and that the special status is also practically revoked with more and more Hindu settlers in the area, as has been the strategy of the BJP-led government. So we're going to be taking a look at this particular decision, particularly in the nuances that it raises with the UN Security Council resolutions, with other legalities, and of course Pakistan's stance on the issue, and what really are going to be the options now available to our country and also to the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and what really does this decision actually say about the judiciary of India and the involvement of the government in the judicial matters of the country, and especially also with regards to the state being a responsible one in terms of the obligations it has to international laws. So this is something that we're going to be taking a look at in our first segment and find in more detail what really has happened and what can possibly be done now. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at the new visa regime that has been launched by the caretaker Prime Minister of Pakistan, and this is a step that has been taken in line with facilitating to business community and to attract more foreign investment within the country. As per the new visa regime, businessmen would be able to travel to Pakistan on the basis of a single document, something that is going to be released either by their own organizations or also by the chambers of commerce within the country, talking about the way that we're going to be moving forward in terms of doing business within Pakistan. So that is going to be our focus at the end of the show today. Before we move on to further discussion, especially with our reference to our first segment and what has happened in India, let's take a look at this package and then we'll continue.
Pakistan has categorically rejected the controversial judgment announced by the Supreme Court of India on the status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a press briefing, caretaker Foreign Minister Jalil Abbas Jilani said India has no right to make unilateral decisions on the status of the disputed territory against the will of the Kashmiri people and Pakistan.
India has no right to make unilateral decisions on the status of this disputed territory against the will of the Kashmiri people and Pakistan. Pakistan does not acknowledge the supremacy of the Indian Constitution over Jammu and Kashmir, being a dispute, internationally recognized dispute.
Jalil Abbas Jilani said India cannot abdicate its international obligations on the pretext of domestic legislations and judicial verdicts, and its plans to annex Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are bound to fail.
The Indian Supreme Court's verdict fails to recognize the internationally recognized disputed nature of Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It further fails to cater to the aspirations of the Kashmiri people who have already rejected India's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August 2019. The judgment is yet another manifestation of the pliant judiciary under India's ruling dispensation.
The caretaker foreign minister termed the judgment as an effort to distract the international community's attention from the gross and systematic human rights violations being perpetrated in the occupied territory. He also vowed to continue supporting Kashmiri's just struggle.
Pakistan will continue to extend its full political, diplomatic, and moral support to the people of IIOJK for the realization of their right to self-determination.
To a question, Jalil Abbas Jilani said even the Indian legal experts have pointed out the contradictions in the Supreme Court's verdict. The caretaker foreign minister stated that Pakistan will also decide its course of action in the aftermath of Indian Supreme Court's controversial verdict.
We will convene a meeting very soon of all stakeholders, and we will also decide on the future course of action in that meeting.
Jalil Abbas Jilani expressed concern that India intends to convert the Kashmiris into a disempowered community in their own land and called upon the international community to impress upon India to follow the international law and UN resolutions. Reporting for PTV World, Musharraf Zahoor.
Well, you heard what the caretaker foreign minister had to say on the decision by the Indian Supreme Court, which has upheld the Indian government's orders of abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. And this is, of course, something that's happened back in 2019, something that Pakistan has been raising its voice against. However, we haven't really seen any action taken against these unilateral decisions. And now, of course, with the kind of ruling that we have heard from the Indian Supreme Court, perhaps a difficulty has also risen in terms of how exactly now this is going to be approached, particularly in light of the UN Security Council resolutions and what options are now available. For this and more, of course, we're going to be discussing this with our legal experts, and we've been joined by our analysts, Raja Faisal and Farooq Batafi. We've also been joined by our guests online. We've been joined by Mr. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, who's a former ambassador. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us and being part of the discussion. We've also been joined by Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani, senior leader APHC, Azaz Chaudhry, DG ISSI, and Barrister Safia Laghori, who's a legal expert and a political analyst. But I'll start with you, Ambassador Qazi Saab, with reference to what has been happening since, of course, quite some time now. It has been decades that the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir have been suffering. And since 2019, we've seen that the unilateral actions taken by India have also seen no consequence. And now there is also the Supreme Court ruling that has upheld the government's orders. How do you see this particular development, especially given the fact that the UN Security Council resolutions are still in place? There is, of course, another party that is linked to the status of Jammu and Kashmir. However, it seems that the unilateral actions that India has taken have now sort of gained more ground. What can we do about this?
Jay, thank you very much for inviting me to join your panelists on this very important development. The verdict of the Supreme Court of India has turned out to be as expected. There was really no doubt about what it would be. It does not have any significance for the legal status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It remains occupied territory, it remains disputed territory, And the decision and the Supreme Court of India may be the highest authority, legal authority in India. Its verdicts, if not consistent with international law, have no value whatsoever. So from the point of view of Pakistan and all other law-abiding citizens of the world, including Indians who give importance to international law, this verdict is of no consequence. It is part of the run-up to the Indian elections, and Mr. Modi may even have a slightly greater majority in his expected victory in the coming elections and all, but it cannot impact on Pakistan's policy and does not impact on the rights of the Kashmiris or the status of the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir, to which Pakistan is a party.
Right, and Ambassador Saab, I understand your point of view, but when we talk about consequences, especially given the fact that we have seen these unilateral actions taken back in 2019, it's been almost 4 years now, more than that actually, and we are still standing on a position where, of course, we say that this does not really impact the status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but the fact remains that these actions were taken and there hasn't been any consequence, even though these are violations of the UN Security Council resolutions and international norms and traditions. And even though we can argue that the status remains unchanged, does this not also add to the misery of the people, because it allows for and paves the way for even more human rights violations and illegal actions being taken in the occupied territory?
You're absolutely right. A genocidal process has been underway for quite some time in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and it reached a particular culmination on August the 5th, 2019. And the Indian Supreme Court decision merely confirms, the legal status from the point of view of the government of India and the Supreme Court of India. The situation there remains exactly the same. Now, you might say, what difference does our questioning the authority of the Supreme Court of India to rule on disputed territory which is not recognized as part of India? Our point of view is that how relevant is it? It is very relevant, provided our point of view can be backed also by a strong image of a credible, viable country whose voice carries weight. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, even when our legal and political and ethical, moral arguments are accepted as being very valid and very weighty, they don't have much consequence because, unfortunately, the image of the country has suffered greatly because of the quality of governance that we have had over the past decade or more. And we would have to make our voice count by becoming a far more credible international entity as a country that is dealing with its own problems, economic and human rights and political, and once we do that, then our foreign policy can acquire a degree of weight and credibility that, as a country that is not terribly successfully grappling with its internal challenges, cannot ever have. I mean, to put it very crudely and bluntly, but accurately, a failing country can have no foreign policy.
Right, I absolutely understand that. But my question also would then stem from this particular discussion, that when we talk about what is against the international norms and traditions and the UN Security Council resolutions, international laws, then when we talk about forming credibility of our foreign policies, it's a shame that we still have to establish that, given the fact that we are also dealing with something that's outrightly, blatantly in violation with international norms. Shouldn't that carry weight in itself also? While, of course, I understand that there needs to be more action on our side, but doesn't that violation itself carry enough weight? And I'll add to this another question, Ambassador Saab, with reference to the decision. There's also the ruling bit about holding elections next year in September. And while we argue that the decision is just something for within India, but then again, if the elections are in fact carried out and are allowed to, isn't that something that will then impact the status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir internationally as well?
Well, the fact of the matter is that moral, legal considerations only go so far as in today's world, and indeed for a very long time in international politics, power politics, realpolitik is what counts for much more than legalities, especially with regard to great powers. And India is acting as if it is a great power, and indeed its ally, the United States, does regard it as an emerging great power, and more than that, as an ally against its chief rival, China. So America, tragically, while pretending to be a great moral force and ethical force, completely ignores India's illegal, immoral, policies in how they call it, in gross violation of the human rights of Kashmir, which it sort of, talks about, yes, that it shouldn't happen and we're involved with India and all, but it doesn't really care because in today's world, morality doesn't really immediately count. In the long run, it will count. It will count. And the fact of the matter is that more and more people around the world are waking up to what is happening all over the place, even with regard to Gaza, for instance. You see the demonstrations which are taking place in the West. Tragically, they're not taking place to the same extent in Pakistan where they should be, but the world is waking up to the dangers of great powers or powers assuming or wishing to be treated as great powers, totally violating all the norms of international law and morality and the sovereignty of nations and the implications of this for the survival of human civilization, especially with the kind of existential challenges that we face today and which require global cooperation and some sort of consensus on how to go forward. So, the behavior of superpowers and aspiring superpowers in total violation of this does pose an existential challenge for the entire world. The world is waking up to it, but at a rate which is far slower than what is required. And Kashmir is one of the problems that we face as a result of this. Now, what is it that Pakistan can do? Pakistan must maintain its position, which is totally valid. Pakistan's diplomatic efforts must continue. Now, what will they? What impact will they have? Well, we need also, very much apart from articulating our point of view, as a party to the dispute, we must intensify our support in every peaceful, legal manner possible to the freedom struggle in Kashmir. And there are many things that we can be doing which we haven't done enough. We tend to sort of make verbal statements and all, but there are many actions we can be taking, and we need to consider those actions in order to ensure.
Such as what actions?
Of the freedom struggle in Kashmir, which is valid. Pakistan has every right to support it, and even we have every right to provide it with the means of waging their just struggle against illegal occupation and atrocities amounting to genocide. There have, after all, been two genocide alerts issued by the Genocide Watch. So, it is a case of a genocide in process, just like as is happening in Ukraine. So, there is much that can be done. And I have, quite a few years ago, even written an article about a six-track approach that we could adopt towards Kashmir. I can't articulate that in detail right now because we don't have the time. But I could mention it briefly if you would like me to.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we're going to be getting you back again soon to talk more in detail, especially in terms of what action points can particularly be taken by countries like Pakistan. And as you said, of course, we are party to the dispute. Let me also welcome in the discussion Mr. Altaf Advani and Barrister Safiya Allah Qari, who've also joined us online. And Barrister Saab, let me start with you first, given the legalities of what is going on, because I still want to understand when we talk about the fact that something is in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. We've done that before as well with regards to what has happened in 2019 and even previously as to what has been going on in the occupied territory. What sort of then legal avenues or measures exist when there is such a violation, when a state Supreme Court upheld the decision of a violation in itself? What really is the legal course?
Right. So thank you very much for having me, Sana. And let's look at both the avenues right now. We have one avenue that is afforded to us by international law, and another avenue that is afforded to us by the domestic law of India. Now, it is important to state here that this decision that has come about, which is about 468 pages, I'm still reading through it, but I have skimmed through it, and it's absolutely shocking to see that the Supreme Court of India, despite the fact that there were multiple plaints, 23 in total, and they all mention international law, the Supreme Court of India in its decision has completely sidestepped international law and has not made any mention whatsoever of the kind of international obligations that India has. Now, when it comes to Pakistan, I feel like this was a final nail in our coffin. And I don't want to be the doomsday sayer here, but the reality is that our cause of action, so to speak, arose in 2019, as you have already mentioned. That is when the law was violated. We have done nothing about it for 4 years. The Supreme Court of India's decision now just reaffirms the prior action that was taken illegally. And this action was not an ordinary action. This action was one that goes against two important issues. One, which is the instrument of accession and the law of pacta sunt servanda, which is that all promises must be honored. The instrument of accession made Article 370 a precondition to Kashmir joining India. That was not honored with the independent state legislature of India. And that in itself is an international problem. And of course, then the second problem is that of the United Nations Security Council's resolution, which clearly asked India and Pakistan, both countries, to maintain the status quo of their respective territories. Now, Pakistan to date has maintained status quo. Kashmir, Azad Kashmir, and Gilgit-Baltistan are to date not included under Article 1 of the Pakistani Constitution. However, India has gone berserk. It has of its own and here's what's funny. I want to just sort of take you through what India has done, because this in itself should be a case study in how evil governments can be. So because the Article 370 subsection 3 clearly stated that only the Constituent Assembly of Kashmir, can amend Article 370, and Article 370 is a part of the Indian Constitution. So now, in order to subjugate Kashmir, India in 2019 first changed Article 367. Under Article 367, it changed the word Constituent Assembly of Kashmir to Legislative National Assembly. Then they made another amendment in their law by which they gave powers to the president. And now here's the shocker. And I cannot believe for the life of me how an ordinary Indian is standing by this. Because, and this is not something that I say because I'm a Pakistani and we have an vested interest in Kashmir. This has nothing to do with me being a Pakistani. If I was an Indian, I would be screaming just as loudly and I would be just as upset. And I'll tell you why. Because Article 370 was undone by the President of India. Now the President of India is deciding the future of the Constitution. The Indian Constitution is similar to the Pakistani Constitution in that the President is just a titular role. The President cannot undo the Constitution, cannot render an article of the Constitution completely infertile the way Article 370 has now been rendered by the Supreme Court of India. And I want to add here that this behavior of the BJP of completely overriding the state legislature is not just in Kashmir, which is a Muslim state. It has also been done in Madhya Pradesh, in Bihar, in Maharashtra, in Arunachal, in Manipur, in Tamil Nadu. And the question here is very simple. What is the purpose of an elected state government then? Why would people even cast votes for anyone? because what you are doing is you are allowing the president to take so much power that the powers of an ordinary Indian have just been taken away. If this today it's just Kashmiri Muslims, tomorrow it's going to be every Indian, even Hindu Indians,
Absolutely.
because the government is now saying that the Indians and the will of the Indians is completely irrelevant. The state legislature has absolutely no bearing upon what they want to believe in, and therefore they will have no responsibility to their
Right,
welfare.
absolutely, and I hope, Barrister Safi, that this is something that is dawning upon the people in India as well, and they are cognizant of what is going on. But Altaf Wali Saab, I'll come to you with reference to what has been going on. Of course, the APHC has always supported and upheld the aspirations of the people of Kashmir, and has led movements to, of course, the call for the right to self-determination. And in the face of such atrocity and such absurd realities with reference to what is going on, and then, of course, talking about today's ruling, how exactly is it then when we understand that this is so nuanced and so complicated and unbelievably illegal? Despite all of that, how is it that we move forward and can actually do something about it in terms of making sure that when we talk about a violation taking place, it really means something?
You see, what the ruling says, today's ruling is not new thing for the people of Kashmir. The Supreme Court of India or the other judiciary of India has never been friendly to the people of Kashmir when it comes to the freedom struggle of people of Jammu and Kashmir. We have always seen such verdicts in past. Having said that, for the people of Kashmir, we did not start the resistance against the Indian occupation on any of the place of the Supreme Court of India or from Indian Constitution. The right is given us by the UN Security Council resolution. It's under the UN Security resolutions we get allowed to have a resistance against India, and we demand our right, which is right to self-determination as recognized by the UN Security Council resolution. So, as already said by Ambassador Saab and the other colleague, that Indian laws cannot override the UN Security Council resolution. So the basic and fundamental thing is that Kashmir remains a disputed territory. But what India has done since 2019 onwards, the legal warfare which they introduced in Kashmir, the main aim of what was to change the demography of Kashmir, to annex the Kashmir into the Indian Union, and to have the Hindutva agenda to extend it towards the Kashmir. They have been doing it, and when they completed the process of it only 3 days back, when they introduced the two bills in the parliament to have some reserved seats for the migrants and for the Sharnathis in the coming legislative assembly, and also to give some what we call concessions to some of the downtrodden people in Kashmir. So this is all an election move by the BJP government. BJP wants to win the next elections in India, and we saw the swing in the north, and that swing was because of the Kashmir and Pakistan bashing by the current Indian regime, and they continue to do so. The people of Kashmir, they have no other recourse than to resist. They are resisting. They are reeling under the occupation. Their voices have been choked. They are suffocated at each and every level. But still, they continue to resist. You have seen even today, all the resistance leaders are already behind the bars. They have been booked under UAPA. But even those leaders who are involved in Indian politics, who want to remain in the Indian domain, they were also placed under house arrest even today, before this was already been were arrested on August 2019 onwards. So they also don't have any political space. It's time for all the Kashmiris, for them also to rethink on that, who still think that India is a democracy and there is still room in the Indian secularism. Now, India has totally converted itself into a fascist regime. It has done so much to the people of Kashmir and to the other minorities in India also, then nobody should believe in India. And the Indian Supreme Court's today's judgment has also exposed Indian judiciary at the international level also, because they have not taken cognizance of any of the international law, as was already said. They just made reference to the Indian laws, to the Indian constitution, and to the what they called the instrument of accession, which is also already a disputed one, whether that was signed on the day when India invaded the Kashmir, and if the instrument was there, that India has surrendered. Legally, it is that when they went to the United Nations, they have surrendered that instrument of accession, and the United Nations after that said that there will be a Palestine Kashmir, and people of Kashmir will be asked to decide their political future. So how can the Supreme Court of India make such a huge claim that the accession was final Jammu and Kashmir? If it was final, then why there were only three of the subjects on which the Parliament of India was making the laws so far, and how the way they have amended this law, even in this judgment, they have said the way it has been amended, it is a way, it looks like it is from the something hidden, but they cannot revert everything,
Right,
because
absolutely. I understand that, Vani Saab, but what next now? What can be done?
so the two things for Pakistan. It is as was already said by Ambassador Qazi that and my friend that on 5th of August 2019 our response was not to the expectations. So this time it's for us to have the response in total, that Pakistan should take this case as was taken on the in 2000 in 1956 when the Indian so-called that Constituent Assembly said that the accession is final, and then Pakistan approached the UN Security Council, and UN Security Council at that time gave this what we call Resolution 122, which says that no state assembly has a right to do any to take a decision on the part of people of Kashmir. So one thing is this. The other is that we have to make a diplomatic offensive all round to sound the people that what actually it means to the people of Kashmir, what actually India wants to do to the people of Kashmir. There should be an urgency in public as well as in diplomatic circles for this. That's only we can do, and the people of Kashmir, of course, they have no other option but to resist. They will have to pay the price for it, but the Indians will have to pay price, and I think
Right.
if it goes beyond, then the whole region will pay the
Right,
price for it.
absolutely. Thank you very much, Altaf Hussain Wani Sab, for joining us. And thank you, Barrister Safiullah Qari, for being part of the discussion as well. We've now been joined by Azaz Chaudhry Sab, who's DG ISSI. And thank you very much, Azaz Sab, for joining us and being part of the discussion. But I want your perspective also with regards to what we have been discussing, especially with reference to what Pakistan can do or what can be done now that we are seeing illegality upon illegality happening. Since 2019, we talked about the unilateral actions being taken. We've also run a clock for 4 years, but we haven't really seen the kind of consequence or action that is needed. Will more time just pass by, more years just pass by even after today's ruling, and we'll be looking back and saying that this is illegal, it's unacceptable, but on ground, what happens is that India gets away with it.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for having me in your program. Let me just say that I am not DG ISSI anymore. I am running my own think tank called Sanover Institute. Having spent all my diplomatic career dealing with issues that concern Pakistan, the most conspicuous issue that we have dealt with is Kashmir issue, because this is very close to the heart of the people of Pakistan. The people of Kashmir and people of Pakistan have been connected with each other through centuries, through their, whether it was the markets for the Kashmiris or whether their waters flowed towards Pakistan. So these ties, which are deep-seated and deep-rooted, cannot be cut off by 70 or 75 years of, atrocities of the Indian and of the Indian security forces and the Indian illegal occupation of the state. That said, I would say that I was not really surprised to see the Supreme Court of India's judgment, because India's Supreme Court has been biased towards the Hindu agenda. Even when the announcement came on the Babri Masjid, the verdict was again heavily in favor of the Hindutva agenda of the Modi government. And this time around also we see the same thing. And it has been, timed in such a manner that politically the government of Prime Minister Modi will gain a big support for the forthcoming elections. At the same time, I also see that the Kashmiris have been robbed of all their rights. The government of Pakistan has never accepted that Constitution of India has any kind of sovereignty over Jammu and Kashmir, which is a disputed territory to us. But we have also seen that Pakistan has fought wars. Pakistan has tried bilateral approaches to resolve the issue. But for India's intransigence, India's stubborn attitude not to resolve this issue, we are standing where we stood 75 years ago. The people of Jammu and Kashmir are still longing to have their right to self-determination, but India continues to use force. Now, you can ask me, and I think you have asked that question, how would the world react, whether the world will be able to exert enough pressure on India to honor the pledges it had made towards the international community in the form of UN Security Council resolutions, that a plebiscite will be held, that the ultimate decision will be taken by the people of Kashmir on their political destiny.
But Chaudhry Sahab, more than in terms of putting pressure on India, I think we're beyond expecting India to act in a certain way. What we really need is a consequence of a violation that has happened 4 years ago as well. We also know that the ruling says that there is elections next year, and it seems that it is also a very true possibility that the elections will happen and India will get away with that.
Yeah, you see, the real politic in the world is the order of the day, as you must have seen in the case of Palestine crisis, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, everywhere. The mighty are having their way. We see that despite all the excesses by India, there is no international reprimand of India. We also, it is mainly because India at this time is required as a partner by the West in its strategic competition with China to contain the rise of China. So India comes in handy in that sense. So despite the fact that India is a strategic partner of the U.S., India maintains ties with Russia and also economic ties with China.
Right, absolutely. And that has always been the case, unfortunately. But thank you very much, Azad Chaudhry Sahab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Faisal, when we take a look at this entire scenario, of course, the question remains the kind of inaction that we've seen by the United Nations, by the international community since 2019. There is, of course, the big fear that we'll see the similar kind of inaction in the next couple of years as well. And when we see the very real possibility of elections taking place, this means a big change for the people of Kashmir and adding to their atrocities. And there's not enough time to stop that. What is it that we can do urgently for this?
Yeah, Sana, if we obviously look at the action of annexation, the illegal annexation of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir by India in 2019, at that time, of course, the abrogation of 370 and 35A, it was a unilateral step which was taken by India at that time. And since that time, of course, it was expected that the sanity will prevail, that the Supreme Court of India would of course, null and void it. But, that is not taking place because sanity is not prevailing. And if we talk about, this decision is not only against against their own constitution, but it is against the charter, UN charter as well. I mean, if we look at the resolution 47, it says that the plebiscite is the only solution, and of course it is a bilateral, bilateral the conflict which is to be resolved by the United Nations, and if it is not being accepted by the Indian Supreme Court, it means that there should be more resolves that should be sought by people of Jammu and Kashmir, illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So what I'm looking at, of course we know that the Kashmiris, they have been fighting for their rights before, they will fight for it even in coming days. And if India is not respecting the international law, if India is not respecting the UN resolutions, then people of Kashmir are not left with any choice but to pick up the arms and of course resist against the Indians.
Right, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because we want to talk about this in further detail. And Farooq, I'll take your input as well, because our all our guests have also spoken about how Pakistan perhaps can do more, and we've seen that the caretaker foreign minister has also said that they're going to be taking in all stakeholders and making sure that this is something that goes out to the United Nations, to the OIC countries and the rest. And we've done similar moves before, and while it may be true that this conversation has more momentum than it did in the past, we still haven't really seen it good enough on ground for the people of the occupied territory. And so I want to then understand that is it also required at this moment for us to reevaluate our strategies in terms of what we're doing diplomatically and politically, and move on to maybe other measures such as what Faisal was pointing towards? Or is it that we can intensify our political and diplomatic efforts more and achieve what we haven't so far?
Right, Sarah, thank you very much for the question. I think that Modi government is a godsend for Kashmir cause and for Pakistan. I don't know why do we or why should we worry that doing should impact our strategy, because in my view, all they have done at this time is what they have proven is that India is no more a democracy. Let me give you just qualify this aspect. Supreme Court actually touched this case after 4 years of hiatus, and after that also they actually reserved the judgment and kept on waiting for some indication to see which way the wind blows. When I'm sure that there must be more than one verdict that was written, one, the just one, the other one that is to placate Modi. When they saw that in the by-elections Modi has won, they decided to go along with this plan. So democracies and judiciary and democracies don't, behave like this. All we need to do is keep on pointing at this injustice. Remember, Sana, this is a case which was open and shut, and it was pro-Kashmir, open and shut case. At that time, when they abrogated Article 370 and 35A, at that time there was no elected government in Kashmir. And by the way, India's constitution says, Article 370 says that Constituent Assembly can actually change the status. Constituent Assembly actually ceased to exist back in 1950s, and after that what we have seen is that they went and they tried to rename or give a new status to the federal government of India, so that central government can actually change whatever it wants to. And that's why the way they actually conducted, they have actually made a mockery of their own constitution. It doesn't change our stance, because our stance is that India has occupied the territory illegally, and it has no right to divide it, to make it a part of India. And we can continue to do that. But simultaneously, all we have to do is point at the way Indian state has been dealing with Kashmir and its own constitution. And it is clear that Nehruvian India is dead, and now you have Modi's Bharat to contend with. And it will continue, of course, but usually authoritarian regimes, whenever they are there, they keep on asserting themselves until their fuel runs out. So I
Right,
think
absolutely. Right, Farooq, I'd also like your perspective on our next segment. We have a very short time for that, but the visa regime is an important step that has been taken by the caretaker setup, and they, of course, have done this in terms of facilitating more business in Pakistan and attracting more investment. Do you think that this will eventually result in something substantial, or do you think that this is a measure that was a long time due?
it was a measure that we had waited for quite some time, but it is great that the government has finally done it, and it is going to, make ease of doing business in Pakistan, a reality in coming days. So I think that visa and market access to investors is something that is great. I think we all should welcome it and hope that it actually brings the kind of results that we need.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Farooq, for that. Faisal, anything you'd like to add about this?
Yeah, just wanted to say, SIFC, it is going to, of course, benefit the SIFC as well. We know that there are different sectors of investments, and I think this visa regime, it is, of course, going to help out that as well. The investments we are expecting, FDIs we're expecting, they will, be very helpful in that.
Right, absolutely. And we, of course, hope that is the case. Thank you, Faisal, and thank you for joining us as always. And thank you to all our guests for joining us in the debate. That's all we have from the show today. We'll now see you tomorrow.